the 78 Superman, owes a lot to Star Wars reminding people that science fiction and fantasy can be fun, because that first Superman movie, that's one of the ones I grew up with as well. And it's fun and a little bit of goofiness. But yeah, when you look back at some like science fiction, when like Ray Bradbury, I mean, there's definitely a place for like a darker area of science fiction, but it's not always a fun read. I mean, I, Robot, when you read the book, it's at times downright frightening. Yeah. Of what could be. So to have this view of space where it's exciting and adventurous and the heroes win and there's a clear cut line of good and evil, that's something I think the world always needs.
Well, they almost did it with Star Trek, because they were actually making a Star Trek movie just before Star Wars was released. In fact, Ralph McQuarrie was doing some designs on an updated Enterprise. And it was going to be directed by Phil Kaufman. And you know who that is?
Actually, I don't.
He later he directed Invasion of the Body Snatchers, the remake.
Ah, okay. I don't think I saw that one.
But Jeffrey Katzenberg at Paramount, who was at Paramount at the time, 1 month before the release of Star Wars, killed the Star Trek movie. It had a subtitle called Planet of the Titans. And see, they had in the early 70s, they had plans that went back and forth about trying to bring Star Trek back, either as a series or as a movie, and the delay was they just couldn't settle upon a story to bring it back. And so all this back and forth between the creative end and the executives at Paramount just, I think in one respect they raised an audience expectation for an exciting space adventure. So when that came out in the form of Star Wars, that's where the science fiction fans glommed onto, and the word spread from there.
Yeah, and then everybody's tried to copy it, and you had like your Battlestar Galactica, and actually just recently heard about a movie. What was it? Battle Beyond the Stars? There's actually a podcast called Techno Retro Dads that covered that film, which was also somebody trying to capitalize on Star Wars to try to figure out what it was about Star Wars that was so compelling to everybody that brought us into the theaters, because there's money in it, of course. And I think that's probably why it's nice that Star Trek was able to come back, and I think I've heard that the first Star Trek motion picture was originally made for television, and they thought, you know what, maybe we can put this in theaters. But I don't think they really got some of the idea until like The Wrath of Khan, because The Wrath of Khan gave us a villain to hiss at and heroes to cheer for, and a situation that we didn't know how they would ever get out of. But Captain Kirk gets out of every situation.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. No, Roddenberry, you could tell from the first Star Trek film that he wanted a more of a 2001: A Space Odyssey feel to it. And that's why some of those scenes were so slow. Going through V'ger, it took forever to go across V'ger, or it took forever to go around the Enterprise, And so he wanted the visual effects to carry it through, and it turned out, apparently, that fans were bored by all that. Yeah, it's nice to see the Enterprise, but let's get on with the story.
Yeah.
Right?
So that's why we kind of ignore that movie exists.
But Roddenberry, the year Star Wars came out, and again, I've got this cataloged in my book, he looked at the long lines of people wanting to go see Star Wars, and he says, that could have been us. And even William Shatner, I've got him cataloged, documented too, where I have his reactions. I've got George Takei's reactions. They were kind of jealous, to see Star Wars strike first. And they said, yeah, it's a fun adventure, but Star Trek is smarter, we're more intelligent. So they're a little bit jealous at the achievement that Star Wars had.
Yeah, and I don't think they should be jealous, because I think Star Trek has accomplishments on its own. And I've never bought into the idea that you have to like one or the other. I love them both because they're both different enough to where there's something an appeal in both. I mean, Star Wars, you have your adventure. Star Trek has adventures too, and yeah, they're sometimes a bit more heady. You can learn stuff from Star Trek, Star Wars, you're just going to have a good time. And so there's things to appreciate for both. And I think there's room for us all to get along and love it all together and wonder what would happen if we ever got a real crossover.
Well, I think you're right about that. And, to give Paramount credit, they, even after Star Trek The Motion Picture didn't do as well as they expected, they did make more Star Treks. They did see there was enough of an interest to make that kind of adventure we wanted to see in The Wrath of Khan.
Oh, yeah.
And beyond. And then they went to Star Trek The Next Generation, and, the rest is history.
Yeah, The Next Generation, I think, struck that almost perfect balance of having that adventure and that mystery and that exploring these weird unknown things, and yet they were able to take it to this level of you could almost political intrigue, because now they were having to work with other races and other species and other planets. So, I mean, the original Star Trek is mainly a lot of exploration and these weird things of learning and discovering, and it's exciting in that way. The Next Generation, you had those episodes where we were discovering new things, but you were also had this more established, well, we've met all these different races, now we're trying to figure out how to get along and help each other, and it was almost that perfect blend. So Star Trek was always going to have a good spot, I think, out in the fandom for just being different and unique for what it is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's see if Eric has anything he wants to throw in here.
No, I think I've got everything. Honestly, this is going to be such a great resource, and I'm looking forward to the future volumes as well.
Oh, yeah.
One of the very first things I did when I learned about Star Wars, episode 1 was on the horizon. The first thing I did is I went to my college's computer lab, found an article and printed it out so that I could look over it, review it, peruse it, and just glean whatever information I could out of that. So having a resource where you can go to and find these stories and find the details and the information, this is really going to be a wonderful addition to the bibliography and the lexicon that's out there for Star Wars. And I'm really looking forward to having an opportunity to read this.
Oh, I'd appreciate that very much. In fact, you'll find some details in there where George Lucas himself said that Luke and Leia were not the same age. There was a 2-year difference between the two.
Mm-hmm. Oops.
Oh, yeah. Like I say, it's all documented. He admitted that in 1976, but then, he didn't have, the saga straight at the time. At the time, he only had the one movie that he was going to do, and after Star Wars, he was going to do Radioland Murders.
Oh, yeah.
And then surprise, surprise, you got more Star Wars to make.
Yeah, so he was basically making it up as he went along. Mark Hamill himself said, well, maybe he should have saved the Death Star for Return of the Jedi or Star Wars 3. Because, where do you go from, blowing up the Death Star? You got to find some menace that's, threatening enough. And so you see in later movies that, the weapons of mass destruction were used over and over again. You
just a little bit bigger each time.
Just a little bit bigger, and in The Force Awakens, you have a solar system killer now.
Yeah, that was a scary idea. I wonder, how in the world, because basically Starkiller Base was a planet, how in the world do you aim that? The things you have to wonder about, like how does this work? But yet when you watch a movie, you just kind of go with it because it's that level of fantasy that exists within Star Wars, where it's got a science fiction environment, but you have the fantastic things going on, and you have wizards and knights, that are pretty much the same people, and cowboys and pirates, and it's any little fanboy thing you had as a kid is suddenly thrown into this galaxy far, far away, and it's like anything you could possibly want is there.
Yeah, pretty much. That's just the genius of George Lucas's creation.
Yep, it must have been everything he just loved as a child. He just put it together.
Oh yeah,
that's exactly what happened. Yeah.
And you can't go wrong, because I think that's actually, Walt Disney himself pretty much drew upon everything he loved as a child and brought it out in ways and made sure everybody remembered why they love fairy tales and some of those stories. I mean, those are the type of people I think are probably the most creative that can bring their childhood together and then release it in a way that even the adults are having fun and remembering their childhood. So it's kind of what we try to do here. I don't know how well I do it, but
well, hey, it works.
Yeah. But you definitely reminded me of, I used to like to collect magazines for movies that were coming out, and I still have grabbed a few somewhere around here. I've got one for even when Thor was coming out. I found a magazine that detailed some of